Good morning and welcome to Psych Talk, where we talk psychology and then some. I'm your host, Sean Hupel, and if you want to catch up to this recording or other recordings for past episodes, feel free to visit Autistic Commando on YouTube. And if you want to just dive a little bit deeper into who I am, Autistic Commando on TikTok. So today what we're going to talk about is the subconscious and the ego. You know, light stuff. Why not? So the subconscious and the ego, they are kind of one and the same, like the ego is a branch of the subconscious. But let's talk about the ego for a second, because we are an egocentric nation, but we're kind of proud of it. Nothing beats good coffee. So, when I say that we are an egocentric nation, we are a very capitalistic nation. And part of capitalism is marketing, the subdivision of my degree. So marketing, I've done that for 10, 15 years, but it's basically the proposition to sell somebody something, to get somebody's attention and say, look at this. So what that does is it glorifies an aspect of luxury, because in America, we love luxury. Oh my gosh, yes. All right, straight up Gucci. And that whole luxury concept, like we want to feel privileged, we want to feel better than. And that's when the ego decides to step in like, diamonds are a girl's best friend. These worthless pieces of rock that we had an excess of, that we are now hoarding, are a girl's best friend. Dead serious. Like, if you look up De Beers, that's like, I think, marketing 108? 108 or 120, somewhere in that bracket range. But it's one of those studies where you see with De Beers, they had all these useless rocks made of carbon, but they were kind of shiny, and they didn't reflect, colors, they just reflected light. And so they had to make money off of these worthless rocks anyway, right? So they took on the tradition of giving a band. Now, it could be a wristband, it could have been a finger band. That's an old tradition from the old English 1800s, So this whole marriage and proposition of proposing, okay, that's basically offering a proposition, because you're proposing. And the proposition back in the day was, okay, I have money, so here is this luxurious item to mark that you are mine, because, misogyny. And the 1800s, like 1600s, 1400s, go back in history. But let me take a sip of coffee. Ah, yes. But we have been obsessed with luxury and status and all of that for so long. And that all boils down to the ego. The ego is based around superiority. Now, I've mentioned this before, but the alpha-beta complex, whether it is natural or naturalized, it is a part of society. Okay, we recognize those that are considered alphas, and we recognize those considered betas. And then, of course, you got people like me that are the omegas. And I say the joke that, yeah, the alphas will start it, the omegas will finish it. Because neurodivergence, we fall massively into the omega category. That's because we think mechanically, not socially. It's why we're horrible on dates unless you're a nerd, and then it's fun. So, ultimately, the ego doesn't really affect... we have a puppy in the background that's still training. If you hear that whining in the background, I swear to you, we're not torturing dogs. In fact, I love our little cutie booties. That's what I call them. But the ego is a funny thing because we want to feel superior. We want to not feel inferior. Because when you're inferior, that's when you're inferior. You're a subordinate. You are answering to somebody else. You're controlled by somebody else, which is why throughout history, freedom is the big thing that humanity has sought after, isn't it? It's what America claims to make us great. And so it's this unique dynamic where to have status, to climb, to basically be fed off the ego unto Machiavellianism. When we are in that narcissistic situation, where glorification of oneself is ultimately glorification of the self, meaning exaltation, rising up. I mean, false sense of superiority or not, I mean, fake it till you make it, at some point you will. And that's the unique aspect of it. So, when we look at the ego from that stance, the ego is a self-defense mechanism. It doesn't distinguish between self and self-identity. Now, I'll stand on this all day long, every day of the week. Will you find it in the book? Nope, not yet. An emphasis on yet. But the ego's job is to make sure that you are safe and that your progeny are safe. That's its only job. And the ego, I mean, basically it throws emotion out the door, and that's what the ego is meant for. It's meant to focus on self, not others. And it's why pretty much anybody emphasizing, follow these studies, be empathetic, be kind. Okay, they warn against the ego because the ego can dominate us and cause us to dominate other people so that we can be secure in ourselves. It's what the wealthy do. And what people forget is we are still human. And we have a need for natural stressors. That's why our bodies need to exercise, stress. Our minds need to exercise, stress. Otherwise, both will wither with time. They will atrophy. And if you want to know what atrophy in the brain looks like, look up dementia and Alzheimer's. Okay, there are precursors for it, but at the same time, your brain will eventually erode if you don't use it. And that's part of the warning against the ego is when you reach a certain point of status to where you have no external threats anymore, then you start going on vacations because you have nothing to stress you and keep life interesting. And so you look for these little stressors like skydiving and all those other wonderful things that the wealthy do in order to get away. Or you exalt yourself in your luxurious resorts and all of that. Or being on a yacht, sunbathing because you can. These people feel heavily unfulfilled. That's why they're always on vacation. It's not because they want to, it's because they can't figure out something else to do. Or more specifically, something else to do that's not beneath them. That is the ego saying, you know what, I'm not going off. I don't need to be off. Okay, we're still working. Even though they're completely secure. And so the ego becomes obsolete. And if you didn't follow me on this one, again, Autistic Commando on YouTube, this is going to be up there. So you can rewatch this episode because there was a lot to unpack right there, but at the same time, I would challenge anybody to prove me wrong or try. But the ego, it's completely focused on who we are and what we are. I want to re-emphasize that. It focuses on who we are and what we are. And what it does is it tries to blend the two together. So human beings overall, we are compassionate creatures. We are empathetic creatures. The abnormality is the psychopath, or the true, honest-to-God narcissist, that doesn't really feel emotion towards other people, empathy, a sense of community. And so with both of these advents, effectively what's happening is we're not distinguishing our humanity from being human. Again, I'm going to repeat that again because maybe this is the pastor in me coming out. But we don't distinguish between being human and being human. See, we're social creatures, and we often ignore the capability of being benevolent unto ourselves. Okay, I just spoke in a circle. Okay, follow me. Excuse me. And yes, I'm keeping it on there because reality, right? But we deny who we are for what we are. We seek to benefit ourselves materially or socially instead of being societally productive unto gaining material things by being productive, by being a good person, by being more than ourselves. I mean, heaven forbid we actually follow the instructions of gurus and all of that were more knowledgeable than us. It's an amazing thing to know that the field of psychology is actually almost 4,000 years old, if not older. Like, it goes back to ancient Mesopotamia. People like me used to be known as viziers and all of that good stuff. Okay, the power behind the throne. That was people like me. In fact, that was my professional life in so many different ways. But in order for that to work, a person has to be glorifying themselves above others. There's a thing that we all know about called Schadenfreude. So Schadenfreude, 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 pronounced correctly, and that's basically where we take pleasure in the misfortune of others. But did you know? And hold on. So what ends up happening is for us to take pleasure in that perceptive reality of minute gain. Okay, it's one person. There's 8 billion people in the world, going on 9. And for some reason, we see that one person disenfranchised a little bit, and we get this little expression of dopamine and whatnot. I don't know if that was natural or naturalized. I don't know when that became a part of our DNA, but we get a chemical pleasure response when we see somebody else fall under hard circumstances. Or at least we can train ourselves to do that. As a kid, I didn't laugh at somebody falling on a banana peel. Like, oh, that happened. And then I was taught to laugh at that, to laugh at the misfortune of others. That's what I was taught. All right, now let's step in with the other side of things. Because there is another side. When you give to somebody else, don't you get a sense of pleasure? Don't you get a sense of doing good, feeling good for helping another person? Right now I'm reminded of Monsters, Inc., where they were just scaring people like, ah! And that's how they created power, which isn't too far from esoteric ideologies spanning back a few thousand years. But we're not going to dive into the esoteric at the moment. But then they learned how to make people laugh, and that produced more energy. So, okay, fine. My subconscious is basically saying, go esoteric, go esoteric. All right. So you know how you walk into a room and you feel vibes? Like the vibes are off, the vibrations? That's where it came from, and the vibrations relate to a person's state of being. People who are brighter, people that are kinder, people that have a more solid heart, they are people that you just want to be nice to. They are people you don't want to be mean around. I talk to somebody for 2 to 4 hours per day, beautiful young lady, and she is like a walking, talking grand priestess, if you're into Dungeons and Dragons, right? If you're into, like, she is so pure in nature that you don't want to swear around her. Her friends are that way. I'm that way. Like, I have the mouth of a sailor sometimes. I don't around her. And it's affecting the rest of my persona, meaning I'm declining swearing when I have the opportunity to freely and in context. And I'm declining it. Why? Because I regularly talk with this individual. It's amazing how acts of kindness can radiate to others and can basically become infectious. And basically it wars against the ego. The ego is involved with self and self-preservation. I mean, you can throw anything you want at me, and I will throw it right back and stand on those grounds. The ego is a social self-defense mechanism. That's why we get the fight-or-flight reflex when somebody makes fun of us in public. Like, when it's just when it's just 2 people, right? 2 or 3 people that have known each other for a while. They know they're safe with the other person. And so they will crack on each other. The same way that I crack on my best friend whenever we play Fortnite. Okay? I play Fortnite with him and his kids. And we crack on each other, openly. And we love it. Like, I'll crack on him, he'll be like, it got me. Then he'll crack on me and I'll be like, that hurt. So we go at each other. And it's an inside joke, but what happens if we went at each other around other people. Well, now that extends like what could be joking embarrassment to this group, and you don't know how that group's going to use those words against you. And it's a sad thing that we live in a society that's like that. It really is. I mean, seriously, I constantly war with myself because I am a sarcastic individual. And as far as Schadenfreude goes, like, I've definitely experienced sensations of joy at the misfortune of others, especially when they wronged me first. But not so much anymore. See, hanging around this Grand Priestess made real life. Seriously, there was a movie, Splash, I think. Well, we're not going to go into that. A 1980s movie, if you haven't seen it, it's actually worth watching. It's not something that I would own, but it's something that I would watch once in a while. But long story short is our kindnesses can bleed into other people. Now repeat that. Our kindnesses can bleed into other people. And that's why being a good person is a good thing. Being a light shining unto the world, and so on and so forth. Which, by the way, that covers 4 different religions. Like that little phrase I just said, 4 different religions. I'm not just focusing on one. If you feel like that I'm focusing on one, that's because you know it in your own religion. But being the light that shines upon the world and shows other people who and what you are, that matters. And we're seeing it increasingly so. And our ego is the one that's saying, focus on yourself. You got, you don't need to worry about them. You don't need to worry about what they need. Worry about what you need. Excuse me. This is what happens when you have allergies. I need to get some Flonase. But the ego, it's something that will rebel against you too. Okay, so in previous episodes, I've talked about, shaman and young people going on walkabout. Alright, you go walkabout and then you walk until you find yourself. Then you face yourself for what yourself is. That's an Australian thing. And that's adopted from the Aborigines. Kind of like how Americans went to Hawaii and started adopting Hawaiian customs, but they actually celebrate them now. Like, oh my gosh, we may be haoles, but at the same time, like, ooh, this is a good culture. It is a respective culture. It's a culture where people benefit each other and accept each other for who and what they are. Right? Not in America. Oh no. Hawaii is kind of like an island unto itself in some ways. But Native Americans, you walked until you found your spirit guide. You went through a state of meditation or a state of aquatic deprivation, meaning dehydrated, until you found yourself. And you can accomplish the same thing through meditation. I know this because I've done it. And you will face yourself. In some cases quite. Well, not literally, but it feels literal at the time. And then you get to see yourself for what you are. That's a rude awakening. Your ego basically manifests through your subconscious in order to demonstrate who you think you are. And then you have a conversation with yourself. And you realize, yeah, maybe I could be a better person. Or you realize, I need an adult. And that was actually my case. Okay, so my exploration was done during my teenage years. Because keep in mind, I'm autistic, obsessed with psychology, and I wanted to see, is this real? I test things that I find, meditations I find, thought patterns that I find that are littered throughout history books and correlated throughout multiple different religions and histories and cultures. I dive into that because I want to know, is it real? Well, in this case, it is. When you start challenging your ego and suppressing your ego response, and your ego response is to laugh at somebody, it's to humiliate somebody, it's to enjoy embarrassment, it's to enjoy self-exaltation, and the perception that you can basically disenfranchise somebody else or just accept their disenfranchisement in order to respect your elevation and status or to acquire greater of the same. Again, Autistic Commando on YouTube, if you want to watch this over again, because I'm not repeating it. But the simple gist of it is that through self-exaltation, you also end up with the requisite of legacy. You see, people that aren't caught up in their ego, that are self-confident, because your ego is what makes you feel not confident, insecure. Your ego is the one that tells you, no, you should be insecure right now. You should be insecure. Fix this. That's what your ego is telling you. And when you start denying that and realize, oh, I don't need to react to this situation, then life becomes easier. A phrase I've held since 16 years old was, if it doesn't affect your tomorrow, don't let it affect you today. True story. If it doesn't change your tomorrow, don't let it affect you today. I mean, you can enjoy the moment, you can sink into the moment, but being self-aware is counter to the ego. The ego is a response mechanism. It isn't a proactive mechanism. It responds to external stimuli that may produce advantage, or prevent disadvantage. So you don't want to be disadvantaged, you want to be advantaged, and you want to be secure. And people that ride their ego, I mean Machiavellians, there is a reason that people that adopt Machiavellianism are very financially successful. But then you've got legacy, the thing I mentioned a minute ago. So legacy is where people, and I love talking to people on their deathbeds. I love talking to people on their way out because they are so honest and candid and just thoughtful. They're looking at their life, okay, what does my life mean? And then they look at it and say, you know, yeah, like a few people have, like multi-millionaires that I've talked to, that I've met through different clients back when I was in Arizona. As they get their diagnosis that basically says, okay, you're on your way out. And you actually have a date set. When people are in that stage, they're looking at what makes them happy, what makes them content. What am I leaving behind? And ultimately, what so many of them are leaving behind is family. Like you're not taking money with you. You're not taking your possessions with you. Yeah, you secured your family financially, right? But are you taking anything with you? That is what the ancient Egyptians found out. You can't. They tried. And they followed a religious belief based on, well, I'm not going to go into that side of esoteric. But they adopted this belief that, okay, I'm going to come back with all my stuff. And that was a very, very diluted and misinformed version of what the pyramids were actually built for, according to so many different histories. I mean, they were built around the same time period around the world, and we're not going to get into the pyramids, but what we are going to get into is the hubris of thinking you can come back and get all of your stuff back. You can't. And people at the end of life, they respect this. They respect the fact that the only thing that really matters is the relationships they built. So many of them adopt this. So many. And it is quite impressive to see how some people will change their mannerisms and how they view things. There are people who have changed their entire persona in the end of life. Now, I prefer to learn from these people and change my persona much earlier in life and realize what is really important: relationships. I mean, this homeless situation out here, I am working to fix it. I am networking right now, and we've got a foundation that is going to, that basically has a framework to solve homelessness, including PTSD and trauma, within that context, while also benefiting the American dollar. $55,000 per year is the 2018 report on how much is spent per homeless person around the country. $55,000. Wrap your head around that. $55,000. We spend more to take care of our homeless than what a lot of people make per year. So, being a patriot, hence why I joined the Marines, I decided I was going to solve it. Plus, I'm autistic, so I'm quite capable of solving multilateral problems. I have been doing it my entire career, which is how I supported myself. So what we're doing right now is we're basically creating we're going to be entering the agricultural industry. Because there is a need, at least half the year, to stop importing certain types of produce. And we have a very efficient means by which we can do so with a very small footprint, both carbon and real estate footprint. So it's a viable, and we've done the feasibility studies and all of that. I've decided that I'm going to be a good person, and I decided to change my persona to where, okay, yes, I want to be comfortable, but I don't need to be rich. I could be. I had plenty of opportunities, but I chose not to sell myself out. Because I know my persona. I know that moral wounds are a real thing. Again, Autistic Commando on YouTube. I covered this in previous episodes. I think this is episode 16, The Ego and the Subconscious. But moral wounds are a real thing, and that's why people who basically climb over others to gain financially, they get more and more bitter through time. Because they're not real conquerors. All they are is taking advantage of a situation at the disenfranchisement of others because they have a certain semblance of power. That's it. And there are some people, I've mentioned this too before in previous episodes, that the wealthy, they're bored. And so what do? Stir up a few things, or business as usual. It's why it's so easy for them to dehumanize other humans. Plus, most of them haven't experienced hardship. I didn't know what hardship was until I hit 18. So, wrapping up on this side of things, the ego is basically a social self-defense mechanism. But when we face it, when we start denying the ego the things that feed it, our reactions, when we start becoming more mindful of our surroundings, more mindful of our reactions to things, looking at them with thought instead of emotion, we take all the power out of the ego. And basically we can engineer a scenario to where our ego is going to rebel. Because our ego, again, it's not something that I think was necessarily built into us. I think it was something that was naturalized and then ultimately acquired onto genetics. Because we all have an ego. We all have an ego. I don't care who you are, you could be Mother Teresa, you still have an ego. Question is, do you conquer your ego or not? And that is the basis for Taoism, that is the basis for Buddhism meditation, like the meditation techniques. It's to face yourself first. To recognize yourself, body and mind. And those practices are well recognized. They are respected. So, what about the subconscious? Where does the subconscious play into this? Excuse me. Again, not cutting that out. Because allergies are a real thing. But the subconscious is, in a way, almost like our own secondary persona. So, we don't really know where the subconscious is housed. My theory is prefrontal cortex. It's the middleman between our hippocampus, which is our memory center, and our frontal cortex, which is where our consciousness is, like how our consciousness manifests. And keep in mind, scientists still don't fully understand consciousness. True story. But that's also because of all the things that tie into consciousness, and awareness, and self-awareness. You want to fool somebody, convince them that they aren't themselves. That is a trick as old as time. And pretty darn accurate, if you ask me. Yeah, we've got coughing around the house because of allergies. That's what happens when you live in Lebanon. I don't know if you heard that in the background, but I apologize. I don't apologize for my own. But our subconscious, it's this supercomputer that's taking in everything. Like it's literally taking in everything and running programs in the background to analyze. Our subconscious is taking in everything, micro expressions from other people. It's taking in the longevity of us. It's taking in, oh, this is good, that's good. That's bad, this is bad. Like it views things from an external standpoint, but also from an internal standpoint. So it's looking at, oh, I've got coffee. Okay, number one, is this coffee warm? Oh, this is going to be enjoyable. I love the flavor of coffee. This smells amazing. Not really. But then you've got the other side that's saying, well, but coffee is a little bit acidic and it can eventually, hurt you in excess and so on and so forth. And then your subconscious is going through this calculating process of, well, 1 cup a day won't really hurt. And that's not really what your subconscious is doing. It's analyzing potential for longevity. Our subconscious is a protective mechanism, among other things. But it looks at this cup of coffee and it's my frontal cortex, my consciousness that says, oh, this is delicious. I want this. And the subconscious is saying, either don't do it or do it less. And the way it says it to us is our intuition. We get these feelings, these gut feelings, based on vibes, because our subconscious is analyzing the ego response through micro-expressions and overall expression and perception of other people around us. And it's either warning us or saying, hey, that's a cool person. Share a cup of coffee with them. Our subconscious is built to analyze everything around us and tell us what we're missing consciously. Because we need to be present in the moment. That is the purpose of our conscious. We need to reflect on the moment, we need to analyze, but we also have a component in the background that is analyzing super extra. It's analyzing every single second of every single day, taking in different people, taking different objects, taking in our role in different scenarios. Because it is like the super advanced AI. It will take into account, okay, I was thinking this, feeling this when I did this. And through all of that, was it beneficial? Was it detrimental? And through, I guess you might say, correlation, experiential reference, as well as moral reference. So through all of this experience that we take in through our lives, it tells us whether or not we should do something. But our conscious mind still has the ability to choose yes or no. We'll get these intuitions, these impressions. And that is our subconscious at the lighter levels communicating with us. So what are the higher levels? Well, it's arguably, the subconscious has its own personality. I'm not inclined to believe that so much. That's one argument that's been out there for quite some time. But I think our subconscious is an extension, but also an alternate persona of our consciousness. Why do I say this? Because I will be thinking something, and I've done meditations that put me a little bit more attuned to my subconscious. I've learned to listen to my gut impressions, and when you're going through your day, you see something and then you get this other image in your head like, oh, I remember that, or oh, I'm thinking that. You get this image relative to the circumstance or this feeling. You remember a song that takes you back to a certain period of time, a very specific period of time. You have a memory come up based on the external references that your subconscious is taking in. And that's your subconscious trying to talk to you and say, oh, think about this scenario because that's related to this. Or what did you learn from this scenario because that's going to happen here. Our subconscious is basically piecing things together through correlations in order to act like the super AI that's guiding us away from challenging situations. That is what our subconscious does. It's kind of built in. But it's not the controlling factor. We ultimately have control. But then again, when I'm in touch with my subconscious, sometimes I will hear a joke. In fact, some of those jokes will be very self-deprecating, the same way that my best friend would make fun of me during Fortnite. Just little playful jabs and whatnot. But as I'm thinking about things, like an impression will come up of, wow, you're feeling really special, aren't you? Or, yeah, this, or yeah, that. It's just like, God, alright, you got me. And that happens in my head. It makes me laugh at myself. And you'll find that quite often with people that are attuned with their subconscious. They have a very strong internal dialogue. Because that dialogue is real. That dialogue helps them process through things and recognize things a little bit more fully. People with... I don't remember if this was a doctor's supposition or if this was an actual study. It's been a while. But people who have a stronger internal monologue tend to have a better quality of life. They tend to be more optimistic. They tend to make fewer mistakes. They are constantly engaged with themselves. And that's not a bad thing. Our subconscious is a tool. I say let's use it. Are you kidding me? Excuse me. With our subconscious being a tool, we have a couple choices. Like, have you ever had a gut impression that was right? Of course you have. Why? Because we all have. That's our subconscious yelling at us. When we get this feeling of, get the heck out. Okay, that's your subconscious yelling at you. You need to survive. Go! In fact, I think autistic individuals are more attuned with their subconscious, individuals like me, because there's a guy named Connor Mitchell on TikTok. Yeah, I know I just said TikTok on here. I'm still getting used to that. But Connor Mitchell, Connor DeWolf, DEWOLFE, I think. But he did this video about, alright guys, we're at the club. Okay, how do you feel? Nope, vibes are off. Alright, you heard him. You heard the man. Let's get out of here. He is not the only autistic individual like that. When I have a bad vibe about things, my friends, like if I voice that, they know to go away. And same thing with the high priestess I mentioned earlier. We had a conversation about that. Like how when she has a vibe about something, she's right. Autistic individuals have walked into and out of more situations than I would care to count. And that's a unique thing. It genuinely is. So it's always good to have an autistic friend around, because having an autistic friend around, I mean, we get those vibes, we get those feels, and we genuinely look into, okay, why are we feeling this way, and then we express it to our friends around us. But we're more conscious as a group from what I've seen, from what I've personally observed. Okay, keep in mind, I do correlations all the time. I've been tracking certain things for 20 years plus. Not joking. And in the end of it, autistic individuals, you'll find that once we get vibes, again, look up Connor DeWolf on TikTok. He's a really interesting resource for speaking about ADHD and autism. But yeah, have an autistic friend and consult with them before going into a club or going into an event or whatnot. They'll feel out the vibes, and I don't know what it is about our subconscious or whatnot or how much it's taken in, but it takes in a lot. In fact, that's why, just a little sidebar real quick, is the reason autistic individuals are, how to say this, the reason autistic individuals survive so many things is because we follow our intuition. That's the point blank and skinny of it, is we follow our intuition and get ourselves into and out of situations. But that's where the subconscious comes in. Like, the subconscious is what we lean on. We lean on our gut feelings as a community. But then again, you talk to people in flow state, right? We're talking about business executives that crawled their way up from the bottom, those individuals. They will tell you that they follow vibes. They follow how things feel because they're listening to their subconscious. Our subconscious is one heck of a mechanism. It really is. Because it will allow us to perceive what we wouldn't consciously recognize. And then it yells at us. Our subconscious will yell at us. It'll throw a memory in our head. Or it'll throw like a feeling in our head. Or it'll make us remember a feeling in our head. And that is directly applicable to the situation as it is. Our subconscious, it's not like, it throws emotion to the wind usually. Our ego is what relies on emotion. But our subconscious throws emotion to the wind and just basically says, okay, this is what it is. And it's meant to be a self-defense mechanism. It is. Why else would we have our subconscious? This extra thing that's analyzing everything around us, communicating to us through dreams, which we're going to get into in a second. But why would we have that? Let's just get into it. So, you know how you have dreams? And sometimes those dreams are reflective psychologically of your state of mind? Maybe some conflicts there going on in your head. I know I should do this, but I'm doing that anyway. Because that benefits me. But I know I should do this. That is your subconscious warring with your ego. So your subconscious is basically responsible for your well-being overall. Okay, it wants you to survive. And so it gives you different vibes about, oh, this scenario, don't do that, or do this. It'll give you suggestions. But our ego is basically working by a response of selfishness. And that's why people talk about what's called the ego death. That's where basically we allow our subconscious to be our controlling factor and dismiss the ego. Because the ego, it's kind of outdated. Like if you're narcissistic, Machiavellian, all that other good stuff, then yeah, the ego is absolutely relevant. But up until then, not so much. And what we're finding is that our egos and our subconscious, while intertwined, they're not that intertwined. They are separate. The ego works with the subconscious, but it is primarily a separate mechanism. And the same way that, I'm not going to go into the Ashkenazi. I'm descendant of Ashkenazi Jews. And we have what's called, why not go into it? We have what's called Lynch Syndrome. So basically, people like to focus on the negative. One negative can get rid of 10 positives, right? That is a rule of thumb, sadly, that is colloquially known, but not wrong. So with Lynch Syndrome, we focus on the fact that, okay, it's going to potentially end my life shorter by cancer. Okay, I joke about that seriousness by saying, one day I'm going to fart and die in that order. And what we're finding is that, what has been known for thousands of years is that the ego, it's mostly focused on individual survival, whereas the subconscious is more focused on integration. So integration into society, but also integration into the moment and into the circumstance. So the subconscious has taken everything in from the perspective of ultimately survival and situational awareness. But survival is more than just bodily survival. You see, the ego is focused on bodily survival. The subconscious is focused on overall survival, quality of life. Because we can survive all day long. But the subconscious is what is pushing us to exceed just surviving. And that's why, um, not contrary, or not the contradiction. So, ego death, that's also related to dreams. Follow me on this. So, when you have dreams saying, oh, I did this wrong, I did that wrong, and oh, you're going through this, you're interpreting it this way, but think of it this way. Okay, our subconscious communicates to us very much like an animal brain. So it communicates through memories, through sensations, through things we saw, through things we experienced. And it gives us dreams. And we can interact with those dreams to a degree. We can usually remember those dreams if we want to. In fact, if you want to try something fun, for the next 3 weeks, just say, I will remember my dreams. And it'll start happening. Say it right before you go to sleep, every night. And it'll start happening. That's repetition, and it also kind of sends a program or a command for a program, if you're thinking computer terms, to your subconscious. And it tells your subconscious, yeah, I want to recollect these dreams. I want to go through them myself instead of just working them out in my sleep. Because dreams force us to face a lot of different challenges just from a different perspective. Our subconscious can only communicate through feelings, emotions, and overall memories, and interpretation of memories. That's why in a dream, we can hear somebody's voice sometimes, and we can hear them re-saying something that they've already said, but generally, we don't always have the ability to hear new things. We can experience new things as they reference different memories that we've already had. Like if we've been kissed on the forehead, yeah, we can be kissed in the forehead in a dream. We know what that feels like. We have a point of reference. Now for things that we don't have a point of reference for, that's when it becomes interpretation. And that's where imagination comes into play. Because our subconscious also ties into our imaginary brain. And the imagination I can't define for you. Excuse me. I'd love to. I'd love to define the imagination. It's kind of like consciousness. We haven't fully defined that. Same thing with imagination. We don't fully know where that comes from. It's humanity's greatest strength, by far. Imagination is how we have solved so many problems. But we don't fully know where imagination comes from. And that's the challenge. So, in the definition of the subconscious, I don't fully understand the subconscious. I will freely admit that. Nobody does. And we've had pretty good ideas throughout history, and maybe somebody did. But today, nobody does. At least none that I've met, or that I've encountered, or that I've read about, or anything. Ultimately, we run into a scenario with the subconscious to where we're trying to reinterpret what our subconscious has interpreted. But our subconscious goes into our dreams to make sure that we have emotional well-being. Because when our emotions are rampant, then we become reactive. And when we become reactive, what ends up happening is that we don't see the situation for what it is. We allow our ego to dominate versus our subconscious to guide. And keep in mind, our ego kicks in very quickly when we're in our fight or flight reflex. It kicks in very quickly. Those two are very much tied together. And we start thinking about ourselves, and we have to consciously think, okay, no, save the baby first. Unless it's instinctual reaction of, oh wait, that's my baby. That's an extension of myself. So selfishness kicks in, progeny kicks in, and we want to protect them with everything we have, the same way that we would protect ourselves. Funny how that ties together, doesn't it? But that's how our ego sees it. Our ego does see progeny as an extension of ourselves. However, the ego interprets that progeny different than our subconscious, because our subconscious recognizes the same. And our subconscious is what allows us, even though they're not blood, to adopt somebody as family. I've done that. My family today is not the family I was born with. And a lot of people can relate to that. And that's where ego separates from the subconscious. I mean, I've only got an hour on this show to talk about all this, and I could talk for days. I can give you scenarios, I can give you things that I've dived into personally, different studies that other people have done. I could dive into religious studies and how they changed an entire culture and nation. I could dive into all that. The subconscious is a very complex mechanism, but ultimately it's focused on our well-being, whereas the ego is more focused on survival and long-term survival. So with the subconscious, we get our dreams, and we're basically shown, like, for example, a person can identify through their dreams if they are turning or are psychopathic. Because, a worm eating an apple and all that, yeah, that's kind of a red flag in a way. Bit of a red flag. But let's say you're out in the middle of a desert. In fact, I remember this dream. Out in the middle of a desert, there is a hole right next to you. And somehow you end up in the hole. And then you have to climb out. Only the ladder keeps extending. And there is a storm in the distance. And it's closing in, but it's not quite there. You know it's coming. You feel the air changing, but you are just trying to climb yourself out of that hole. And it was a square hole. And at the bottom there was a dead something, some animal like a gazelle or a bison. And so I climbed my way out of it. But it took a long time and it took extra effort. When I got to the top, the storm was still raging, but it got a lot closer. I remember that dream. I also remember being chased by a clown with a chainsaw after dancing around a really fun college campus that turned into like a fun amusement park indoors. And I still remember that dream because I was being chased through the lunchroom of the college dorm. And it was just a whole bunch of picnic tables, and it had like the whole colorful stuff. Like, it looked like a clown party on the inside. And then you had, Attack of the Killer Clowns chasing after me with a chainsaw. And I remember the turning point where I just got tired of running. So it was catching up to me anyway. I picked up a chair and I decided right then and there, if I'm going down swinging. So I started running after the clown, armed with a foldable metal chair. And I remember the look of confusion on the clown, and then all of a sudden the clown backed off, and I woke up. Memories and dreams give us a point of reference and a measure by which we can attack something internally and make a decision. I decided right then and there I'm not going to be a victim anymore. Even though it was just nightmares in my own dreams. Which, by the way, autistic individuals, we have a lot of nightmares apparently. Because my whole community, they spend their childhood in nightmares. But we also are born into a world that we don't understand and have a hard time identifying with. But we are calculating, which would explain why our subconscious is more prevalent in our daily interactions, whereas other people can more easily ignore the subconscious. Until the point where you get trained, and now you have to rely on people like us to say, nope, the vibes are wrong. Which, by the way, if Connor DeWolf ever sees this one, big shout out. But at the end of the day, we are stuck with both our subconscious, our conscious, and ego. I say both because our conscious and our subconscious, ego is part of our subconscious. It's kind of like an offshoot. So you've got a computer. But then, you can't play video games because it's not built to play certain types of video games. Like, it's just a computer. But then you add a video card. And all of a sudden, you can interpret graphical programs dynamically that you could never interpret before. So the computer is our subconscious. The screen is what we see and interact with. Our subconscious is the computer running in the background, processing everything, calculating everything, keeping track of everything. And then our ego is what can step up the visualizations. It's our video card, in a way. That's about the best modern approximation I can give you mechanically. But our subconscious is a valuable tool. And it's something that we can actively play with. Again, I joke with my subconscious. And I don't know if I'm just joking with myself internally with my internal dialogue or not. That's something I'm still trying to break down. Like, I've been tackling this one for years. From this angle, that angle. Step away, come back to it, tackle it again. But that doesn't change the relevance of the subconscious. And ultimately, we have the choice to be slaves to our ego and basically turn narcissistic or Machiavellian or sociopathic. Excuse me. Post-nasal drip, man. Let me tell you something. The allergies in Oregon never stop, especially when you live in the country. But we have the choice to listen to our ego or our subconscious. Our ego is focused on personal and temporal gain. With the advent of potentially growing our family line and passing on that legacy, the financial legacy, to the next generation. Then we have our subconscious that tells us, be a good person. Be the type of person that won't have moral wounds because you did something wrong. Be the type of person that acknowledges society and acknowledges others, and be a better person. That's what our subconscious is doing. That's what it's saying. There's no in between on this one. And with our subconscious yelling at us, do this, don't do that, it becomes our choice ultimately, consciously, on whether we listen to it. It becomes our choice ultimately on whether we embrace our ego and become much more selfish. Selfishness has its place. It does. But we also happen to live in a country, America, the United States of America specifically, that is very narcissistic. Like, we embrace material things. We judge other people based on how many material things they are capable of buying. We celebrate, though, or people celebrate their peers when they dominate another person. And we ingrain this through video games. Like, I just dominated this person over here. I just griefed him over here. That's taught early on in video games. And that's taught early on in sports. Okay? And there's value to competitiveness. There is. There is true, genuine value. I would love to get back into the ring with somebody who's better than me and get my tail kicked. I would love that, because I would learn from it. And I'd have some fun on the way down. But that is my subconscious desiring personal growth. That's not my ego. My ego is the one saying, don't hit that thing that's harder than your hand. Don't go against that person who's stronger than you. Watch out for yourself. And then learn how to leverage your situation so that you can better yourself. Throughout the world, ego death is prescribed to by pretty much every major religion. The ones that we still follow that we didn't label as cults. And that's because we are at the point of abundance as a species that we no longer need to rely on our ego. We don't. We can end homelessness right now. Just straight up, boom, overnight. We can end that overnight. And I'm not being too far from the literal, we can end this. And it's something I'm going to be dedicating my life to. Because the compromise between the ego and the subconscious is that what if we can use our imagination, the thing that differentiates us from so many different species, the thing that allowed us to become the dominant species on the planet. What if we used our imagination to say, instead of, we can't do this, what if we could? That's the catch. That's why I'm dedicating my life to the things I'm dedicating it to. Because I've spent 10 plus years tutoring college students from multiple different business disciplines. And I'm going to use that knowledge that I gained that I can't use professionally, but I can use it to better the lives of other people and create a job for myself. And it wouldn't be the first job I've created for myself, out of the thin air. But unlike the previous careers that I had, because there was a time when you couldn't get my number unless a former client referred you to me. There was a few years like that. And in all of that, I wasn't happy. And there were times I had to mask so much that I didn't recognize myself. And so I decided one day I want to be happier with myself. I decided to listen to my subconscious and basically kill my ego. And I'm still working on that one. But ultimately, it led to my decision on what I want to do with the rest of my life helping others. Don't let your ego control you. Listen to your subconscious. And definitely go out into the world and try and be a better person every single day, just like every major religion has told you to do. And on that note, I'm going to wish all of you well, and I'll see you next week. Autistic Commando on YouTube and TikTok. Goodbye.